Do you sometimes feel fragmented, like your thoughts, emotions, and body are all pulling you in different directions? Have you noticed that some areas of your life flow effortlessly while other areas feel stuck or out of sync with your highest self? Have you ever wondered why some people seem to move through life with ease and success while others constantly struggle? What if the reason you struggle to create lasting change isn't a lack of effort, but a misalignment and a lack of coherence in your own system? Most people hear the word coherence and immediately think of something like meditation or nervous system regulation or heart-brain alignment. And while those are part of it, they're only a part of the whole truth. And I actually talk a lot about coherence in this show because it's so central to my own mastery and my own way of life. It's something I've only truly begun to understand in the past 12 months beyond, Joe Dispenza, Bruce Lipton, who are both people that I admire, trailblazers in, mind, body, soul, quantum physics integration, but personally becoming truly coherent in the past year has literally changed me and my life in every way. And it's actually fundamental to mind, body, soul healing, lasting transformation, reality mastery, and personal mastery. So I really want to explain coherence and get into it in detail in today's episode because most people don't understand what it actually means and why it's so important. Or most people have sort of a basic understanding and not the comprehensive understanding. Most people need to hear this because most people are not coherent. Most people are not living in alignment with their highest self, their highest truths. Most people are operating in deep states of unresolved traumas, moving through life as their wounded lower self, with conditioned powerlessness and normalized distortion, and normalized codependency. Most people are living in normalized chronic stress states and a disconnection from their true authentic selves. And that means that most people settle for less than what they want, what they deserve, because they have accepted struggle and stress as a normal part of life. But struggling and stressing all the time, those are not our natural states. Our natural state is actually harmony. I talk about this in my book. True coherence is our natural state, but the modern world and humanity as it is now have evolved under veils of deep deception and distortion that have normalized struggling and suffering and stress as just a part of life. And so many people have accepted limitation, have accepted conditionality as a part of their own existence, when really our highest truth is that we are limitless and we are magical when we are coherent. Welcome to The Simple Source, a paradigm-shifting space where self-love, healing, spirituality, and personal growth are redefined. If you've been told healing takes years, that abundance must be attracted, or that transformation requires struggle, you haven't been told the truth. I'm Linda Valines, a certified trauma-informed holistic coach, author, and spiritual guide. After healing myself from chronic conditions, complex trauma, and lack, not by following traditional frameworks, but by creating my own, I'm now teaching you to love, heal, and free yourself, mind, body, and soul, so you can reclaim your highest health, happiness, and potential with joy and ease. Each week, we go beyond surface-level self-help and into the real mechanics of transformation. If the traditional paths to healing and spirituality haven't produced the changes you want in the life you desire, you're in the right place. You were never meant to struggle or wait for what is already yours. Let's get started with today's episode. So for me, over the past 12 months, I have truly understood the power of mind, body, soul coherence, particularly in the window of 3 months when I shifted timelines over 25 times, like effortlessly, spontaneously. Timeline shifts that resulted in literal and magical and non-linear, quote unquote, impossible, and also immediate changes in my physical reality. Most of them were illogical and unprecedented. And I was living that degree of magic like every single day for 6 months. And my reality was bending to my highest good because I had finally reached a state of true mind, body, and soul coherence, identified as my highest self, and not as an abstract, ideal, but a true identity with, meaning I am my highest self now. And time and causality became nonlinear, not in a disorienting way, but in a really like, oh shit, reality is magical. And we are truly limitless. And I began to experience things that are deemed quote unquote miraculous. But in truth, I was just simply experiencing my reality responding to my level of coherence. And most recently, I experienced a really severe traumatic event where all of my repressed childhood sexual abuse and all my suppressed childhood fears surfaced at the exact same time in relationship. It was horrifying and deeply disturbing, and I literally had like a mental breakdown. But now, 6 weeks later, I am basically fully back to my joyful, clear, regulated self. I went from having to sleep with the lights on in my house because of how severe the post-traumatic stress symptoms were, to being able to laugh at what happened, feeling grateful for what happened, and, skipping around my house again, because that's kind of how I move through the world, because I feel light and free just in 6 weeks' time post-trauma. That's because I have prioritized and invested in my healing, following my own advice and practices that I teach in my program, in my courses, in this podcast. And also largely because as a baseline, I am so fucking coherent. And I don't say that lightly. It's not an egotistical thing. It's just fact. And it's why I heal so effortlessly and joyfully, and why my world is magical and my reality does bend to my highest good. And I do identify as my highest self. It's because I am mind, body, soul coherent. So let's get really nuanced about what that means, because I define coherence differently than other people. I've learned that it's not just about conscious and subconscious alignment or heart-brain alignment. It's not just about inner peace. It's not just about regulating your nervous system. Coherence is about the total harmonization of every layer of your being, which is what I'm going to explain and get into throughout this episode. So for me, coherence must encompass 7 distinct layers. So there's mental coherence, where your conscious mind, your subconscious patterns, and your highest consciousness are in agreement, not in conflict. There's emotional coherence. That means you're not repressing, suppressing, bypassing, or drowning in your emotions, but rather you have cultivated emotional freedom and regulation and clarity. Then there's physical coherence, right? Where your body is also liberated, regulated. Your nervous system isn't locked in fight or flight all the time. Your biology is operating optimally in health, in balance. Then there's spiritual coherence, where you are anchored every day, moment by moment, as your whole authentic and highest self, aligned with your highest truths, as opposed to your wounded false self, operating from unresolved trauma narratives, as opposed to following outdated dogmas, distorted frameworks. And then there's inherited coherence, which is when you are no longer carrying ancestral, cultural, or collective imprints that do not belong to you. That means your identity, your whole being is sovereign. And then there's behavioral coherence, which is when you act, you choose, and you relate with your reality, with people, right, in accordance as your highest self. And then finally, there's temporal coherence, where you're not stuck in the past, but you're actually fully anchored in the now, in the present moment. That, for me, that's real, true, holistic coherence. That's the state of being, of resonance, where all parts of you are resonating together in harmony, like orchestral sections in a symphony. So if one of the sections in an orchestra goes out of tune, the whole symphony sounds janky, right? And so in terms of your human self, that off feeling, that out of tuneness, that actual lack of coherence is what it is. Inner conflict is experienced externally and also personally as cyclical and needless suffering, where you do struggle to move forward in your life. You do struggle to heal. You struggle to be healthy, to be happy, to make progress toward your goals. And you end up repeating the same trauma patterns. You feel like no matter what you do or how much you do inner work, your reality just stays the same and the same problems persist. Many people are sold on partial coherence. They think that just meditating every day or regulating your nervous system or repeating affirmations, that just finding, 5 minutes of inner peace during the day is what's going to actually cultivate transformation. But that's not true coherence. Meditation is going to calm your mind. But if your nervous system is actually storing decades of trauma that your body has not released, you are inevitably going to be repeating those trauma patterns. And your nervous system might be regulated at certain points during the day. But if your subconscious mind is rooted and programmed from trauma beliefs, rooted in your unworthiness, your unlovability, those loops are just going to become self-sabotaging behaviors and experiences. And again, affirmations might feel empowering in the moment, but if they're not integrated, what you're affirming is not actually integrated with your emotional truth, your highest consciousness, or your subconscious even, what you're saying is just going to collapse the second that life gets stressful or becomes uncertain. Any of that sound familiar to you? So partial coherence practices, they feel good temporarily, but they don't actually hold under pressure. And so the distortions that remain and the other layers of your being, the densities, whatever is unhealed, unliberated, eventually and inevitably and must, because you are holistic by design, it's going to pull your whole system back out of balance. And so true coherence is not about parts, just your mind being calm or just your body being healthy. It's what real wholeness is. And anything less than that is going to keep you looping in lower timelines as fragmented parts of yourself. And so once you understand what true coherence is and entails, then you can stop chasing tools and isolation. And then you can actually start asking yourself the deeper question, which is, how do I create coherence and resonance in every dimension of my being and my life? That's when coherence stops becoming just a now and again practice and actually becomes who and what you are. So let's start defining coherence more scientifically, because it's not just like woo-woo terminology. It is actually based in science. Coherence is measurable, it's observable, and it's actually rooted in how energy and biology and physics work. So in quantum mechanics, everything from light to atoms behaves like a wave, essentially. And so coherence happens when those waves move in sync, like dancers that are keeping the same rhythm, right? Musicians keeping the same rhythm. And so their relationship to each other stays well defined or synchronized. And so when that synchronization is maintained, then the waves combine into a single new wave that then represents several possibilities at once. That's called superposition. So where one quantum particle can exist in multiple states simultaneously. So superposition and coherence are actually what give quantum mechanics its like unique and seeming magical, mysterious powers. So superposition means like a particle can hold several possibilities at once. It can be in many infinite positions at the same time. You can think of it like a coin that has both heads and tails until you look at one side of it. Now, in order for that to exist and for that to function as it is, coherence is needed to keep those possibilities synchronized, meaning stable. So those wave functions don't collapse. meaning all of the orchestral sections have to stay in tune so the symphony, doesn't sound like shit, basically, and like caustic to your hearing. Coherence is actually what makes the behavior of quantum mechanics possible, from how atoms interact to the foundation of the technologies that we experience like every single day in quantum computers. So your human field works the same way because you are made of quantum particles. That means you are quantum. So when your thoughts and your emotions, your body, your energy, your beliefs, your actions, your presence are aligned, you create harmonic patterns, waves, essentially, in your field that reinforce each other. That's resonance. But when you're fragmented or when you're incoherent, right, your energy is essentially scattered in this direction, that direction. And that's why it feels like your life is static, instead of actually progressive, because there's no symphony, right, that's actually in tuned. There's chaos. And so neuroscience also reveals like the same principle inside our brains. So a coherent brain isn't just one where everything is quiet, it's actually a brain where your neural oscillations are synchronized, meaning different regions of your brain are communicating efficiently, meaning there's integration between logic, intuition, memory, creativity. And so that's why in measured states of brain coherence, people report greater clarity, expanded awareness, flow, right? Access to insights, breakthroughs, knowings that are larger than life, essentially, i.e. genius states. So coherence in neuroscience is not a mystical thing. It's just when your brain is operating as a unified network instead of isolated compartments. And then there's biological coherence. So coherence shows up in the body as systemic regulation. So one of the strongest indicators is heart rate variability, and that's the tiny fluctuations between your heartbeats. And so high variability signals essentially adaptability and resilience, and low variability signals stress, burnout. But true coherence is actually is way more than just your heart rhythms. It encompasses your nervous system balance, your inflammatory markers, your hormonal balance. And so in short, when your biological system is coherent, that's when your body heals faster. That's when it resists stress better, right? Maintains energy more efficiently. When your biology is not coherent, that's when you have systemic high inflammation, right? Poor immunity, poor digestion. Your body cannot return to its healthy baseline because it's struggling to heal and to be optimally healthy. And so there's also epigenetics and inherited imprints. So this is inherited coherence. So science has long now confirmed that trauma and fear and stress leave chemical markers on our DNA, not necessarily by changing the genetic code itself, but by altering how our genes are expressed. And so that's what epigenetics is. So that means we can literally inherit, and we do inherit, the stress responses and distortions of the unresolved traumas of our lineage. And because we're multidimensional energetic beings, we also absorb the energies of the collective as well. And that, of course, affects our mind, body, soul system. And so coherence then isn't, again, just about regulating your own nervous system in the present moment. It's actually about clearing ancestral and collective patterns that were wired into your biology before you were even born. And without addressing that layer, so many people feel like they're doing everything right, but they're still carrying this invisible weight that's keeping them stuck in certain areas of their life. So again, coherence is actually rooted in science, and it is multi-layered. It's energy waves syncing, it's your brain networks and neural networks harmonizing, it's your biological systems regulating, communicating efficiently, and it's also your own gene expression being cleared from ancestral traumas and collective imprints. So coherence really can be considered the holistic science of mind, body, spirit, wholeness. That's a really clear way of thinking about it. It's the measurable state where every single layer of your being operates in harmony. So now let me go back to my own definition and framework of what coherence is and get more nuanced about it, because it is different and more comprehensive than anybody else's. So again, when a lot of people talk about coherence, the common reference point is like heart-brain coherence. You might have heard of the Heart Math Institute if you follow Joe Dispenza. They study how the heart's rhythms synchronize with the brain to create states of heart-brain coherence that induce clarity and focus and emotional regulation. And that research is wonderful, it's beautiful, and it's important. But heart-brain alignment is just one path into a much larger symphony, so to speak. I keep going back to that, but that's a perfect analogy. So if we reduce coherence to just the nervous system or just a mind-body connection, then you miss the larger and deeper truth of what actually makes a human being truly coherent, because the fundamental truth is we are all spiritual beings having a human experience. So real coherence, for me, must incorporate spiritual and energetic aspects of our being, because we are multi-dimensional beings. And that's when you achieve the ideal integration of every layer of you, is when you embrace that you're multidimensional, that you are actually spirit, soul first. And that's when you start to truly resonate as a powerful and limitless unified field. So here's my framework for true coherence. I'm going to break it down. It's comprised of 7 layers. So the first layer, again, is mental coherence. So we have primarily 3 different minds: the subconscious, the conscious, and our highest consciousness. And as a human, our subconscious controls like 95% of our reality. And for most people, their subconscious is not in agreement with their conscious minds or their highest consciousness. And most people also aren't even connected to their highest consciousness, meaning their highest self. And so that means that most people have a conscious mind saying like one thing, right? I want love, I want money, I want success. But their subconscious mind is running on the complete opposite program, because it's still rooted in wounded beliefs of love is unsafe, money is hard to come by, success requires hard work, takes a long time. And then if they're not even in tune with their highest consciousness, they're not even hearing the deeper truths, and those get completely ignored, which is that you already have everything you want because you are the universe, and you as highest self can create universes. And so that fragmentation is actually really exhausting, because it's inner conflict. It's mental conflict. And because, our consciousness is primary, it's one of the biggest reasons that people are not coherent. When your minds are not in agreement, of course, you're going to feel stuck and confused and self-sabotaging, because your subconscious is running on wounded programming, where your conscious mind is like, I want, I desire, but I don't have. And then your higher consciousness is like, I already have. And they're not even speaking to each other. So mental coherence happens when all 3 of your minds, your conscious, subconscious, and highest consciousness, are aligned. They are in agreement. They're operating under the same core beliefs and the same truths, instead of pulling you in different directions. And so when those layers of your consciousness and your minds harmonize, your conscious choices then reflect your deepest truths, right? Your subconscious isn't secretly undermining you, and your higher knowing isn't being ignored, but rather it's being integrated into your daily mindset and your choices. So mental coherence is achieved by inner child work, outer child work, shadow work, maturing your ego, and essentially when your consciousness identifies as your whole authentic highest self and no longer as your wounded lower self. That's key. So now the second layer is emotional coherence. Most people, again, are not emotionally coherent, because we live in a culture that still reinforces suppressing emotions, and people don't know how to emotionally regulate. People are still out of touch, intimidated by their emotions, or if they feel, they get completely consumed by their emotions. People do not have a healthy or even conscious relationship with their emotions. So most people are harboring decades of unexpressed, unprocessed, stuck, stagnant emotions that are trapped in their mind-body system. Emotions do not go away on their own. I've done several episodes about emotional health and freedom, but emotional freedom and health are only achieved when you release your emotions and you release them in a healthy way. That's fundamental to emotional coherence. I recommend listening to the episode about emotional freedom that I did. It explains why releasing your emotions is so key to mastering yourself and your reality. And so if you haven't listened to that episode, I recommend you go back and do so now. But emotional coherence, it doesn't mean being unemotional either. And it certainly doesn't mean being consumed by your emotions, being driven by your emotions. It means having dynamic emotional health, regulation, and integration so that you are emotionally free, you're emotionally balanced, as opposed to emotionally restricted, emotionally constipated. And yes, of course, this entails emotional intelligence, emotional maturity, etc. It really is the ability to name, to honor, to feel all of your emotions fully without judgment, without suppression, and also without overwhelm. Science confirms that emotions are like truly energy in motion. They're literally measurable as electrical and chemical signals in your body. So when your emotions flow healthfully, they harmonize with the rest of your system. They can be integrated. But when you suppress your emotions, they inhibit coherence because that energy is then stored as tension, as density in your body. And that density and tension, of course, is going to distort your energy field and cause imbalances in your biology. Now, that takes me to the third layer, which is physical or somatic coherence. So here, the science is really, truly undeniable. When your nervous system is chronically dysregulated, your biology reflects that dysregulation with systemic inflammation, hormonal imbalance, poor digestion, stiff muscles, compromised detoxification and fertility. And chronic nervous system dysregulation is largely due to unresolved trauma, which leaves people living in chronic stress mode. And research, again, on heart rate variability reveals that when the body is coherent, the heart, the brain, the nervous system actually operate like synchronized instruments. There is a true harmony that happens. However, when unresolved trauma remains in the body because it hasn't been resolved, it hasn't been released somatically, you continue to operate from past responses, right? From survival responses. And so then your body is like literally behaving as if the threat that you haven't resolved, the trauma that you haven't resolved is still happening. And this is where people get really stuck in healing trauma. They think it's just a psychological thing, but trauma is actually largely stored in your body. And so if you're not releasing your trauma somatically, and taking care of your biology and your body so that your body can heal, your brain can heal, you can't be physically coherent because your nervous system cannot regulate. So somatic coherence requires you to release that stress, resolve that stress, that fear, those trauma imprints, so that your biology isn't trapped in those loops. And that's how you become physically dynamic again, instead of being stuck in fight or flight or collapse or fawn. Your nervous system becomes flexible again. You're able to shift between states as needed. And so in simple terms, somatic coherence is when your body stops running in survival mode and returns to its natural rhythm of harmony, of freedom, of resilience quickly, readily. That happens when your body is functioning in balance. Your heart, your brain, your gut, your cells are communicating efficiently because they're not burdened by unresolved traumas and fears and stress. And this is one of the reasons that I have healed from this recent trauma so quickly. I take care of my body. When I heal trauma, it's largely a somatic and emotional healing. I'm not saying the mental aspect isn't a part of it. Of course it is, but I do 15 minutes of somatic exercises like every single night. I've done that. I've done it every night for 6 weeks, So my body understands that the trauma is over. And because I was previously so coherent, it's so much easier for me to heal. All right, so now the fourth layer is spiritual coherence. So spiritual coherence is a direct connection to your highest self and to your highest truths without distortion. This is key. Distortion is anything that sells you a spiritual story that diminishes your sovereignty and your divinity as is, which is unfortunately nearly all common and outdated spiritual dogmas and frameworks that promote a false ascension ladder and karma and hierarchy. So I did a whole episode about spiritual coherence called Why I Stopped Manifesting and my 4-month quantum shift after, that gets real detailed into this. So you should listen to that if you haven't yet. But essentially, spiritual coherence is knowing and embodying your true identity, which is you're a spiritual being, you're a multidimensional being, you're your highest self now. When you live in alignment with your highest self and your highest truths, and you adopt that as your identity now, not in some ideal, not once you've cleared all your karma or whatever, you're living in your truth. And that means you've reclaimed your spiritual sovereignty as your highest self. And then your field automatically becomes more energetically coherent. And because you identify as your source self, and you're no longer obstructed by distorted frameworks that diminish your value, your power, your truth, just watch how magical and powerful your reality becomes. Spiritual coherence is not about being high vibe or, meditating or having crystal collections. It's about being anchored in your multidimensional presence from your highest consciousness, aligned with your highest truth, identified as your highest self now, because again, you are already your highest self. That is fact. Just because you're in a human body does not mean that you are limited as a human. This is just one dimension of your true identity. I actually did a whole episode about how to instantly align with your highest self. That's going to expand on everything that I'm saying here, so you should listen to that if you haven't yet. But whether or not you live from that perspective, that I am already my highest self or not, actually determines the basis for your spiritual coherence. Now, the next layer, the 5th layer, is what I call inherited coherence. And so this layer is really important. It encompasses the ancestral, collective, and other unconscious forms of inherited programming and energies that come with being a human on this planet, because entire lineages can pass down patterns of trauma. And this is a layer that most people often overlooked, and yet it explains why so many people feel stuck even after years of doing inner work or healing. And so coherence at this level means breaking free from ancestral and collective imprints that were never yours. They did not originate in you. And when you release those cords, those imprints, those connections, that programming, that's when you can truly stand in your sovereignty, because you are not your lineage. You are not your mother's, your father's, your grandparents' beliefs and traumas. And the sooner you free yourself from those imprints and you reclaim your personal sovereignty, the more coherent you will become as your true highest self. Now, here's the other thing that I want to make clear, because there's a lot of discussion about we're responsible for healing our lineage. And I'm at a point now where I'm like, that's bullshit. You are not responsible for healing your family. You're not responsible for liberating your parents. You are responsible for healing and liberating yourself. And when you do that, you automatically create ripple effects in your own lineage. But you do not have to go out of your way and take responsibility for healing your ancestral lineage. That's not your responsibility. And so many people put that burden on themselves. And when you do that, you're no longer sovereign. You're anchored into a lineage, and you have an origin story that's not actually your own. So from the moment that you understand that your ancestry and the collective norms are not your identity, not your destiny, and certainly not your limitation, that is when you truly can identify as your sovereign highest self. Again, epigenetics has shown that trauma and stress and fear do literally get encoded and passed down through generations through altered gene expressions. And so that means you can carry imprints of scarcity and shame or hypervigilance that didn't originate in you. And so inherited coherence means you have to consciously clear those collective and ancestral patterns so they don't dictate your present, they don't dictate your future. And it's truly about discerning what's truly mine and what is not. And once those distinctions and those distortions, are made and released, then again, you can return to your sovereignty, and you can stop unconsciously replaying cycles in your relationships and your career and your health, And you can just start living from your own clarity, from your own power that's yours and free. So the sixth layer is behavioral coherence. So this is about whether your actions, your behaviors match your highest truths, your highest self, your highest timeline. So it's one thing to know that you are your highest self, but knowing is not the same thing as being. And I emphasize this throughout my program. Knowledge is not the same thing as healing. You can read something and obtain information, but that information doesn't heal you unless you take action to integrate that knowledge. And that's when it becomes embodied wisdom. So behavioral coherence is when what you do, say, and choose reflects your true identity, meaning you're not acting and you're not relating with other people and with your environment as a lower version of yourself that's still rooted in unresolved fears and unresolved traumas and insecurity, but you're actually acting and relating with other people and your environment as your highest self. Most people have an intellectual understanding of what their highest self is. They may meditate, journal, perform various spiritual practices, but in their daily life, they're still choosing and behaving as an outdated version of themselves because they settle for less than what they want and what they deserve, because they shrink themselves to fit in to norms, because they don't actually show up boldly as their authentic self. And so behavioral coherence is when you walk the talk, okay? It's reflected in every single relationship you have. And so it can also be understood as relational coherence. So everything in your life is a relationship. You know, we don't live in a vacuum. Even when we're alone, we're in a relationship with ourselves, with our environment, with solitude itself. And so if you do behave as your highest self, that means, like, what is your relationship with your highest self? Is it intellectual or is it actually embodied and behavioral? And so if you don't actually behave and make choices and relate to your world and your reality as your highest self, then saying that you know who and what your highest self is actually holds very little meaning. Now, the final layer is temporal coherence. So this is about whether you're living in the present moment or if you are stuck in the past. And so this is another layer that many people overlooked. You know, most people are not living in the present moment. They spend their day ruminating about some part of their past, whether it was something that happened in the morning, something that happened 2 days ago, or something that happened 2 years ago. Many people spend their time ruminating about the past, or they spend their time worrying about their future, which is actually very different from embodying their highest future. So temporal coherence is when you consistently live in presence, meaning you are attuned to the present moment. And in the present moment, you are either fully immersed in it as your highest self, or if you're thinking about the past or the future, your thinking is rooted in felt genuine embodiment of liberation, or it's already done and everything I want has already worked out perfectly. And that's not a bypass, but it's an immediate of, I can let that go. I don't need to think about the future. If I'm anchored fully in the present moment as my highest self, something about my future comes up, then I immediately go, oh, it's already resolved and worked out perfectly or even better than I hoped. And then you let it go and you return to the present moment. That's temporal coherence. It means that you're not bound by the pains of your past. You're not bound by future concerns. You are so anchored with presence in the now as your highest self that you're liberated from the past and from the future. That's true limitlessness. That's real liberation. And that's when time becomes irrelevant. That's when time begins to bend to your highest will and to your highest good, because time moves through you. You do not move through time. And when you understand that, you're really truly free from the anxieties that so many people have, where they feel like they're running out of time, etc. So that's temporal coherence. So when we put all of this together, coherence isn't actually a static state of idealism or perfection. It's just living resonance. It's living harmony. It's a dynamic, ongoing synchronization across 7 layers of your being. mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, inherited, behavioral, and temporal. It's both personal and relational, and it will change how you show up in the world and how the world responds to you, because it unifies you as your highest self, past, present, and future, into your highest timeline, instead of scattering you across multiple versions of yourself, because you're living in clarity, you're living in harmony. And so your field is not fragmented, it's not distorted, it's clear, it's strong. And it's also when your highest truths are lived in action, where your inner state and your outer expression are the same. And so when you achieve true coherence, something really, truly profound happens. You stop living in fragmentation. Distortion becomes really evident and readily resolvable because it becomes so apparent. It feels immediately discordant with your highest self. You start living as an integrated field, and you start to really feel that. You're not going to feel your field if your mind, your body, your soul are fragmented, are in conflict. You only experience your field, your energetic field, when you are coherent. And that is when healing accelerates. That's when your reality reorganizes. And that's when you move from unconsciously repeating old cycles to consciously creating the life and the timeline that you deserve and that you choose. So ultimately, true coherence is the embodiment of your highest wholeness. That's another way to think about it. It's what allows you to stop feeling powerless and to start feeling powerful. And when you live from coherence, you don't just heal faster, you actually become the organizing force of your own life. And that is when you naturally shift into higher timelines effortlessly, because you are resonating at a higher frequency, and that resonance is strong. It is not distorted. It is not discordant. Your signal is clear. So now let's talk about what true coherence does. I keep saying timelines. Let's get into that a little bit. So many people are taught to think about manifestation in very outdated and disempowering ways. And the attraction model has become so culturally accepted now. The manifestation framework, where you have to attract something to yourself, you have to magnetize it, or you got to prove yourself worthy to the universe, and then you get rewarded after you pass tests and you clear a bunch of blocks. But that's not how reality works. The truth is actually far more liberating. You don't manifest, you shift timelines. I did a couple episodes about the myth of manifestation that you should listen to if you haven't. When you're coherent, you're no longer fragmented. You're no longer operating under distortion and density. So that means you stop broadcasting static in your own field. And when that happens, when that noise clears, when the chaos clears, your frequency gets sharper, clearer, higher, naturally, like I said. And then that's when you naturally shift into higher timelines, because you're not resonating through dissonance anymore, but rather through wholeness. Now, you cannot shift into higher timelines when you're incoherent, because your field is still dense. It's still comprised of fragmented thoughts, unprocessed emotions, a dysregulated body, distorted inherited imprints, unresolved fears and traumas that all have their own energetic consequences that affect your resonance and your field. That means you're simply not aligned and resonant with higher timelines. That's why you're stuck. That's why you're not, quote unquote, manifesting, because you're not coherent with the higher timeline. Essentially, your field is still resonant with fragmentation, with distortion, with unresolved fears and traumas. Now, in quantum physics, coherent systems behave differently than incoherent ones. Okay, so when particles are coherent, they act as a unified field. So that means they produce stability and clarity, amplification. This is key. Now, the same principle applies to us because we are made of quantum particles. We exist in a quantum universe, okay? You are quantum. So when your mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, inherited, behavioral, and temporal layers harmonize as your highest self, your whole system resonates in clarity. Then your reality has to match that. It has to shift to that clarity because that's how resonance works. You're not attracting anything because you already have everything in all possible timelines. And resonance is not the same thing as attraction. You simply live in the timeline that you're most resonant with. And so that means that your level of coherence determines your timeline, because your coherence determines the resonance of your field. So if you're fragmented, you're going to keep looping in fragmented timelines, right? Relationships that replay old wounds, jobs and careers that echo ancestral scarcity, situations that feel frustrating and satisfying. But as you cultivate coherence, you not only begin to architect your reality, but you begin to see new possibilities because you naturally align with them, because your external reality is going to reflect wholeness and coherence, because that's your internal and external expression, because your reality is just a reflection of you. Your reality just mirrors you. And so if you've been thinking, I need to attract someone better for me, or, I'll meditate more, I'll use more affirmations, I'm going to think more positively. And then you're worried that nothing's really going to shift because it hasn't really shifted for you yet. The underlying truth is that you don't need to become magnetic, all right? It's a really gross misunderstanding in the whole outdated manifestation framework. Magnetism is not how your reality changes. It's your level of coherence, your emotional patterns, your inherited beliefs about love, your nervous system regulation, whether or not your nervous system still gets activated by old traumas, subtle energy imprints, right, from ancestral patterns that you haven't released, that keep you looping in scarcity, which makes you then not resonate with safety and security. And so your reality changing is not about chasing someone better. It's about embodying and identifying mind, body, and soul as the person who naturally exists in a higher timeline, because that timeline already exists. Whether or not you're aligned with it is just contingent on your coherence, which determines your resonance. And your resonance determines which timeline you're living in. So coherence is not passive. It's active timeline architecture and alignment. You don't change your reality by forcing the universe to give you what you want, by pressuring it, by stating affirmations all day long, or doing that manifestation technique or that manifestation technique, or whatever, manifesting harder or wishing harder for something to appear, or thinking more positively. You actually change your reality by stabilizing yourself in such deep alignment with your highest self that your reality reorganizes to reflect that internal harmony. That's the truth, okay? Your level of coherence literally determines the quality of the life that you experience. Because if you are truly integrated, mind, body, soul, as your highest self, you stop wanting and you stop understanding that you already have everything. You already are everything. And you no longer resonate with lack. You then resonate with abundance, having enough, being enough. That is the promise of coherence. Because when you're operating with the subconscious mind that's in conflict with your conscious mind, that's in conflict with your highest consciousness, that's in conflict with your emotional baseline, that's in conflict with your biology, that's in conflict with the way that you behave in the world, that's in conflict with your inherited patterns. When you're just in conflict with yourself, you will always feel lacking and not enough, because you are completely disconnected from your wholeness. You're operating in fragmentation and still running on distorted, outdated frameworks and imprints that don't belong to you. So you're not truly sovereign. That means you're not really truly free. And you'll experience that again by saying, oh, I want a career up level. I'm doing all of this, but you self-sabotage. That's not freedom of existence. That's an incoherent existence. You're not in harmony with yourself. If you're not in harmony with yourself, how can you expect your reality to be peaceful, satisfying, fulfilling, joyful? Because you are your reality. And that is essentially the gift of coherence. When you come into complete alignment with who you truly are, your highest truths, you invest. And this is not about bypassing. This is not going to happen in 24 hours. But you invest in mental coherence, emotional coherence, physical coherence, behavioral coherence, spiritual coherence, inherited coherence, temporal coherence. There's no evolving, right? Because you are already your highest self right now. There's just reclamation. That's when you truly come home to who you truly are. And that journey is the most satisfying and liberating, because then everything falls into place naturally and effortlessly, because that is the inherent command of coherence. So here's your action step for the week. This is a very simple but powerful practice that you can do immediately, and you can start to integrate what my 7 layers of coherence are. So it's going to take like 10 minutes, but it's a whole mind, body, soul, energy, coherence, alignment scan. So bring to mind an issue or a problem in your life that you want resolved. So first, address the mental coherence aspect. Ask yourself, what disempowering or wounded belief is underneath that problem, right? What's the root wound or need that you're not getting met? And then give that part of yourself that's wounded or lacking what they want, love, unconditional, pure love. You can do that instantly. Then address emotional coherence. Ask yourself, what emotion or what emotions does that problem bring up in you? And then scan your body for where those emotions live and name those emotions without judgment. And then allow yourself to feel fully for 1 minute while breathing and tapping the places in your body where those emotions live. And then imagine or visualize those emotions leaving your body and dissolving. Then address physical or somatic coherence. So I want you to shake your body and hum at the same time. Right? Do that for 1 minute and allow yourself to just let go, shaking and humming, have fun, and tell your body while you're doing that, I'm safe, I'm free, the problem is resolved. Then address spiritual coherence. Ask yourself, what does my highest self know to be true about this issue? And then let your highest inner guidance speak to you. I want you to hear that without filtering it through shoulds, expectations, or dogma. And then address inherited coherence. And this means saying out loud, I release all imprints and energies that do not belong to me and do not originate from my highest self regarding this issue now. And then visualize any ancestral or collective energies leaving your field, leaving your mind, body, soul being, and then creating space for your sovereign and highest self to operate freely. You're going to intuitively see exactly what that is, okay? Then address behavioral coherence. So ask yourself, what action can I take to meet this issue that is most aligned with my highest truth and authenticity? And take that action. And then finally, address temporal coherence. So ask yourself if you are showing up as a past version of yourself, or if you are anchored in the present moment as your highest self. And if it's not the latter, then I want you to ground into the present moment as your highest self. By breathing, by connecting to your heart space, by simply saying, I am already my highest self now. So then take a final moment, just a minute, that's all it takes, just to hold that sensation of all 7 layers completely aligned and harmonized. And notice the shift in you, in your resonance. You're going to feel it. And how much more clarity you have, and your sense of presence and power, and just like live in that resonance for a moment. And so that small practice, again, it's going to take 10 minutes. It's going to start to train yourself to think about all those layers of what true coherence is and entails. And you're going to be able to start to embody it. Because you cannot fake coherence, friend. You can't force it either. It is only achieved when you stop pretending, when you stop suppressing, when you stop denying, and you start embracing your wholeness, your authenticity, your shadows, your inner child, your genius, your beauty, your power, your innate freedom, and your true identity as your highest self. And only then can you live in your highest timeline. Thank you so much for being here today. I hope this episode awakened you, inspired you, and reminded you of what's possible when you love, heal, and free yourself and reclaim your highest truth and power. If this show has transformed or enlightened your self-love, growth, and healing journey, please like, save, and share this episode and leave a positive review on Apple or Spotify. And subscribe to be reminded of new episodes. Your support is deeply appreciated and truly helps this show so much. And if today's episode resonated with you, don't stop here. Go deeper. My book, Unconditional, You Are Perfect As You Are, expands on these teachings and gives you the missing framework about self-love that no one is talking about. So get your copy today to start reading and loving yourself more. And if you're ready for the ultimate healing journey with daily instruction and guidance from me, I'd love to see you inside the Source membership, the only holistic and comprehensive step-by-step self-healing program that is proven to work. Remember, you were never meant to struggle or wait for what is already yours. It's time to claim everything you want and more. All the links are in the show notes. I'll see you next time.